Hello, world history students. This is Mrs. Politsky, and I have your notes for Chapter 3, Section 2, Egyptian Culture. And as we go along, make sure you're using your handout to write down the things that you need. We're going to start with number 1. Egyptians were polytheistic, meaning that they believed in many gods. These gods controlled all things that were happening in nature. So, when we look at Egyptian society, there were so many different gods and goddesses that we could probably spend an entire semester just talking about that. But we're going to focus on the big 3. Osiris, who you see below, that's kind of green, his wife Isis, who's kind of in the middle, and Horus were just a few of the many. They were a family. Osiris is the king and judge of the dead. Isis was Osiris's sister and wife, and Horus was their son, the guy with the bird on his head. Anyway, every year the Nile would flood, leading many Egyptians to worship the goddess Isis because they believed that she was responsible for the cycle of flooding, which brought fertility to the soil. Kind of like what we have talked about with other societies. When the floodwaters would recede, they would leave a layer of silt, and that silt would allow farmers to plant their seeds in some fertile topsoil. The god of the sun was known as Ra, who you see pictured below. Looks a little bit like Horus, except for what's on top of his head. He was important as far as Egyptian gods because he was featured prominently in the sky, as well as being important to the growth of their crops. Number 5, Egyptians commonly worshiped their gods during annual festivals through hymns and songs. People would dance, and they would parade statues through the streets. Pharaohs also needed the assistance of their priest, and as you can see below here, we have some of the different priests here working with our pharaohs for the most part. You can see one here kind of in the upper part. It looks like one of the priests has got a snake in his hands. But needless to say, they would take care of the gods, and in return, the gods were supposed to grant the pharaohs with immortality. Number 7, Egyptians believed in the life force known as Ka, and Ka would, for the most part, separate from the body when a person would die. It's much like the soul. And the Ka would continue to live on after death. When a person would die, food and that person's possessions were often buried with the Ka to provide in the afterlife. So when we talk about some of our pharaohs and some of the tombs that were basically left untouched that archaeologists have been able to examine, we are talking about like a lifetime worth of possessions that happen to be buried, and oftentimes with our pharaohs. But it wasn't just pharaohs. I mean, your common everyday people would probably do the same. When a person died, they were mummified and their internal organs were removed and placed in jars. The body would be packed with various materials. For example, sawdust was a common one to help the body keep its shape. And then the body would be dried out with special salts and wrapped in linen strips and allowed to set for a period of time. And that could take a few years. Artists would paint the deceased person's features on the outside of their, for the most part, their tomb or their the wrappings, so that the Ka would be able to recognize its body. Egyptian society was also highly stratified with a lot of different social classes, the largest being the peasants or farmers who spent a lot of their times in the field. And if you look below, kind of at the bottom left-hand side, there is a kind of a pyramid there, kind of based on population as well. So peasants making up the majority, artisans following, and such. Egyptian women had a lot more rights in their society. They could own property. They could make some decisions for themselves. And so in a way, maybe Egyptian women didn't have it so bad. Number 10, marriage varied from class to class. Male pharaohs actually married their sisters in order to keep the royal bloodlines pure, which, by the way, is not an uncommon thing. Matter of fact, if you look at some of the royal families of Europe during the late 19th century. Many of them were married off to cousins and such. Some of it to keep peace, but some of it to keep the bloodlines pure. Royalty often had more than one wife. And among the lower classes, men typically only married one wife, and they were not related to one another. Number 11, due to the hot temperatures in the desert and intense sunshine for most of the year, Egyptians tended to wear wigs. And we're not talking just ladies, we're talking men and women. And they wore makeup as protection against the sun. You got to remember, this is the day and age before sunblock. Sometimes a layer of makeup would, at times, protect the skin underneath. And other times, it might cause your skin to break out. And number 12, Egyptian artists often painted everything from illustrations of stories of the gods to pictures of daily life. But what you find more common than anything is that most artists, when they did paint people, they painted them from the side rather than straight on because it was easier to paint a profile than it would be to paint the features in great detail from the front. Papyrus is a reedy plant that's found along the banks of the Nile, and it's often used by Egyptians to make a paper-like sheet for writing. Hieroglyphics was a system of writing that did originate out of this region. It was difficult to learn, and it took a long time to compose because of the details, but it was very beautiful and used pretty much only in formal writing. There's evidence that there were other types of writing that would have been used for more common everyday record keeping kind of activities. The Rosetta Stone, though, discovered in 1799 by French troops during the Napoleonic Wars, found near the city of Memphis or the City of Kings, has actually kind of allowed linguists to find out what the real meaning of the hieroglyphics were. They used those images and a little bit of the Greek that was written on the stone to kind of open up the door to what the meanings are of those symbols. Thank you very much.